This one has been suggested a few times for historical tarot, and I'm really excited to finally get a look at this. We are going to see what we can learn about the lost colony of Roanoke. Before we begin the reading, I think we should go over just some very basic backstory as to the situation. So Roanoke, first attempt at founding a permanent English settlement in North America, was established in 1585 on Roanoke Island, which is now called Dare County in North Carolina. It was abandoned at least around August 1590. It was found abandoned on August 18th of that year. Within Roanoke settlement's first year, many people returned to England because they suffered from a lack of supplies, and there seemed to be some strained relations between the colonists and the First Nations people who lived in that area. So that would have been around 1585. So a whole bunch of people, like I said, returned to England, but a few were left. About 2 years later, there was an expedition led by a guy named John White, and they came back. But they found that all of the people who initially stayed behind were now gone. White's granddaughter, Virginia Dare, was born shortly after. I think that's where the name Dare County comes from, if I read that properly during my research. John White had to go back to England for some government support, but he couldn't return to Roanoke because of the Anglo-Spanish War. And during that war, all the possible ships, that were available were used for the war efforts, and White really had no way to get back to North America. But he came back in 1590, so that would have been his granddaughter's third birthday, August 18th, 1590. And he found that everyone was gone. The only clue he could find was the word Croatoan carved into a tree. All of the houses had been dismantled, which means that they likely didn't leave in a hurry. And it was interesting, actually, that Croatoan was carved into a tree because the colonists were instructed to carve a cross on a nearby tree if something happened to them, if they had been forced out, or if anybody had been killed or harmed. They had to carve a cross into the tree to let anyone else know what happened. But there were no crosses to be found anywhere. And all of the attempts to find the colonists over the next several years, either at Croatoan Island or Chesapeake Bay, resulted in failure, usually because there were bad storms and the people, doing these expeditions had to turn around and go back for their own safety, or they were attacked and killed by various groups of First Nations people. It's possible that the Roanoke colonists moved to various locations to integrate with the native people, and some may have just lived out their lives like that, and others may have been killed by, certain opposing tribes. And what we're going to do is take a look at the colonists and what happened when John White came back in 1590 and found the whole place just empty and found Croatoan carved into a tree. Because that would be a really weird thing to come back to. And, so we're just going to pull some cards, take a look at that whole situation. Okay, so we're going to shuffle up and we're going to lay probably more than 5 cards. But there's going to be 5 positions in this spread. I don't know if it's an actual spread or not, but I'll show it to you guys when I'm done laying cards. Okay, I'm definitely going to be laying more than 5. This is so interesting. Oh my goodness. Okay. I'll show you all what I pulled so far. Okay. All right. Well, let's look at the first two. We're going to look at the root of the situation, like sort of the underlying, I guess, theme of like the colony, and then we're going to look at the crossing energy or the challenge. So first of all, we have the Knight of Cups. This is sort of like the idealized or idealizing, romanticizing sort of a card. And this new, settlement, this was supposedly the first English settlement, the first attempt at a permanent English settlement in North America. And to them, like, it's the new world. It's this ideal place where they can begin a brand new life, start anew, and also spread the culture and the values from England at that time to the new world. And these people, they wanted to be the ones to do it. Now, what's crossing or the challenge here, I get sort of like a conquest, almost a takeover energy off of this card, which is kind of what they had wanted to do as well. From the rest of North America's history, we do learn that, that many European settlers, mainly the English and the French, really did come in and take over and take the land away from the First Nations. And if this was maybe their intent, maybe they didn't intend to, steal all the land from the natives who lived there. A lot of these people who first moved from England to this Roanoke probably didn't even know what to expect. But there's a definite energy of conquering. And which means that I'm thinking for the settlers, to them, it's like, look at this new land we're claiming. But perhaps to the First Nations, it's like, they've stolen this from us. What are they doing? The underlying energy that surrounds Roanoke, look at that. This sort of feeling of entrapment. And that's interesting to me because maybe I have an idea who this entrapment is sort of referring to, but I kind of just want to know for sure. Because it could be perhaps the First Nations people felt like these strangers are coming in and taking over, and they feel sort of like helpless in a situation they can't control. Or it could be that the colonists perhaps felt a little bit trapped. It was said that they had sort of a difficult relationship with the native population or in that area at the time. So I'm going to just pull a clarifier on this one and see exactly who that's for. Okay. Maybe a little bit of both. But what came to mind when I pulled my next card is this burden. This is what's going to clarify this one. I think the colonists, they came here and they realized that it was not as ideal as they thought it was going to be. There was a lot of, and this was the next one that sort of fell out with that burden. This is the energetic shift. This is like the new world, the new life. I don't think a lot of them maybe realized how much work this was going to be. And I guess back in those days, people were not a stranger to hard work, because people had to build their homes from scratch. They had to farm for their food. They had to do what they could do, right, to live. But in Europe, that was probably easy enough because they were used to it. But here in North America, it was a lot more difficult than they had anticipated. And we do know that a lot of people left right away because they had a lack of supplies. They had a lack of support from the English government as well. Okay, so there seems to just be, it's like, yeah, yay, this new opportunity, but there is so much work that comes with this, and they may not have felt fully prepared either. They may not have been completely prepared for the task of building this new settlement. They maybe didn't even take into account that there would be other people living around there, and maybe didn't take into account that these First Nations people may not be too welcoming to these strangers coming in to their land, you know? Wow. All right, so the next thing I'm going to look at is going to be, well, in some spreads this is considered the past position, but I'm going to consider it what happened while John White was gone. Because, I guess while he was gone, and while a lot of the colonists decided to go back to England because they're like, screw this is way too hard, this is way too dangerous, we need to go back to where we know we can survive. Okay, and what happened in the time that they were gone, between them and the time that John White came back? First, we have children. So Virginia Dare was like supposed to be the first English child born in North America. Correct me if I'm wrong, you guys, but I think that's why the state Virginia is named after her, and I think that's why Dare County was named after her as well. But more children were born in that time. More children were born, and then we have this like authority or some kind of like ruling figure. I'm just thinking and listening to Spirit and see what I can pick up, because I do kind of have an impression, but I'm really struggling to put it in words. So I think this has to do with both the English government and the colony self-governing. They tried, while they waited for support from their home country, they tried to govern themselves as well. They tried to sort of take care of themselves and rule themselves. I'm going to pull. Okay, and then we have we have the Hermit. So they felt very isolated. They felt very cut off because, there's those people who left the colony and had no intention of coming back. And, then they were sort of promised, like, we'll be back with more supplies, we'll be back with maybe more money, more help from the government back home. And that was about, I guess John White didn't come back for 3 years. And in that time, they felt very alone. And I think they felt maybe a little bit abandoned by the English government. They felt abandoned by, like their mother England, kind of. Okay, and I feel like I'm going to pull more because there is way more to the story than just what 3 cards can tell us. We do know that while those colonists were gone and before John White came back, more babies were born. Who doesn't love babies? The colonists tried to govern themselves and tried to set up. Yes, okay. They did try to set up some kind of ruling system, to keep it's like a municipal government, how in modern days we would call it municipal government. They were trying to set up something like that too for themselves, but they were struggling because they felt very alone. They didn't, for a while, they didn't have a great relationship with the First Nations. They didn't have the supplies they needed. And not only, even the First Nations, certain tribes or individuals that they did have a good relationship with, it was not like those people spoke English, and it was not like the colonists spoke the various languages, that the natives were speaking. So it was very hard to make those connections. It was very hard, and they felt very alone. Okay, and then we find that, when White came back, that the houses had been dismantled, so it wasn't like everything was just up and abandoned. They didn't find any dead bodies laying around. They found one skeleton, I think, but they didn't find like evidence of a massacre or anything like that. So we're gonna pull some more cards and see what the hell happened when the before White came back. What happened in those 3 years? So what else I got? They worked hard and they did their best. And how I said that they tried to establish some kind of self-government system. This is like they worked hard to build the colony, obviously, to build the homes, to grow food, to do what they needed to do to live. And then I have King of Wands and King of Pentacles after that. So, what's that mean then, Spirit? Something is interesting to me. Okay, well, the King of Pentacles, this is where they wanted to be. There were a lot of resources, like natural resources, like types of wood, types of herbs, types of maybe materials and stuff that the First Nations used that to them was part of everyday life, but to the Europeans would be worth a lot of money back home in the UK. This is where they wanted to be, right? I notice the King of Wands is holding a stick. In this case, I'm actually taking this as like a First Nations a chief or a leader of some kind, a First Nations person or group of people who were able to self-sustain, and they were able to live off the land. They were able to do just fine. And the reason the stick makes me think of this is because they were very in touch with nature, and they were very in touch with their world, like the earth, and everything had a spirit, has a name, they understood the concept that we're all connected to each other. And they had a great respect and regard for nature. And that's kind of why that stick there is jumping out at me. And a leader who uses this nature, or this connection to nature, who else but most likely a native chief, or somebody who was native, who was very, very good at living off the land and using the resources and stuff like that, perhaps to help some of the colonists. I really wonder if there was somebody maybe who like tried to help them, or because I don't believe that all of the First Nations had a bad relationship to the colonists. Some did. But I think there were some who were probably more curious than anything, because it's like, well, we haven't seen you guys before. Like, what are you all about? Like, why are you struggling like this? This is so easy. I'll just show you my way of doing it. And then we have worry and fear. I think there was worry and fear from both sides. The colonists, because they are strangers in a strange land. They did not know. I don't think a lot of them were prepared for exactly what they were going to be facing when they went to the New World. And a lot of them were very worried. And I think the natives were also quite worried, because it's like, well, here are these people who have just come in and built homes on our land. What is going on? And there was a lot of distrust, I think, between the two, both the colonists and the natives. I also have here on the bottom, the colonists worked really hard. It's like they really, really tried, but they got tired. And it's not just physically tired, although I'm sure that, had to build everything from scratch. They had to do so much extra work that we no longer have to do in our society, or at least that not everybody in our society has to do. And maybe they were able to sustain it for a little while, but it was getting to the point where it was about to be burdensome. Underneath of that, we have so they left. Tough transition. They left. And they carved Croatoan into a tree. And instead of a cross, like they were instructed to if something bad happened to them, how they had to carve a cross into the tree. Well, they didn't do that. They carved Croatoan, which actually led some historians to believe that they were just giving them the name of the area that they were relocating to, which is very possible. It's very possible that that's what they were intending to do. The bottom of the deck is just like, it's really weird because some readers don't even look at the bottom of the deck, but to me, this is telling me so much information. Next, we have two, actually. We have a few, but okay, we have Queen of Wands. This is like creativity for, creativity and like a creative, maybe type leader. Now, some people also said that during the expeditions where they looked for the colonists, they had found that it was possible that they had taught the natives how to build different types of houses. Not that what the natives had wasn't good, because obviously it served their needs and their purposes, right? But they learned from the European settlers, well, here's our way of building homes. Like, we'll teach you how to do this. And I'm sure they learned from the natives different ways to, build camps and build homes and stuff too. So there's this creation that I think, just what I am feeling from here is that some people already say it's possible that the Roanoke colonists actually just moved to various locations and integrated with the First Nations people and sort of their ways of life. And they taught each other. It's like they created something new together. They taught each other and they created things together. And it was pretty good for a lot of the colonists, because it's like, okay, well, these people know how to live off the land. They know how to survive living here, and we don't, so we need to learn from them. And it seemed pretty successful for a while. At least to many people, that was a good move. I mean, of course, the last one that is speaking to me in the bottom of the deck is just saying, okay, we're done with this. Conflicts. So, I mean, not everything would have been hunky-dory for everybody. Some of the colonists were probably doing way better off integrated with the First Nations and sort of their society and their way of doing things, because it's like, well, we're not dying of starvation, we're not dying of animal attacks or whatever it is, right? But, human nature is like, there's fighting, and there was a bit of that too. So I think that while the First Nations, I do believe, had some very peaceful, probably had a lot of very peaceful ways of living, there were conflicts with rival tribes. And I think that a lot of the colonists sort of got caught in the crosshairs, got caught in the middle of that. And I think some of them did get killed by, rival tribes that had come in. And I think maybe some of them just died of natural causes. But there were still others who were doing okay. Now, when John White came back, he found Roanoke completely abandoned. And was just like, okay, what the hell? Now I have to go look for all these people. So we're going to take a look at what would normally be like future. So I did look at what likely happened to the colonists while White was gone. We're going to look more into like what became of them sort of what best sums that up, you know? What became of them? Why wasn't he, able to find them? And it's just so weird to me that almost every time, like, that had been, reported anyways, that I had done in my research, that somebody went to go look for the colonists, this just fell out. Delays. There was a bad storm, or they would get attacked by a certain tribe of people and would all be killed, or, they'd get stolen from and would be unable to complete the expedition. It was just really, really weird. But what I have for, like, the colonists, this is sort of verifying that this is like a networking sort of a type of card. And in this context, they very much did do a lot of networking with the First Nations people. I think it basically started off as, we need to learn from them because they're able to live out full, good lives here, but we're struggling to survive. We need to learn what they're doing. And that's exactly what they did. They took up the opportunity to learn from the First Nations and integrate with their ways of life so that they could survive. Now, what else, became of the colonists? Let me just take a quick look at my notes. Yeah, so there were various locations where these colonists could have gone, and some accounts of, like, expeditions and stuff, like I said, how they were able to find that it's possible the First Nations learned from the Europeans how to build like 2-story type houses, like out of stone, out of materials that the Europeans commonly used. Okay. And my point there was, like, the colonists very likely moved to all different locations and set up, or moved to different villages or set up different camps here and there. So we're just going to try and confirm, like, what happened there. Yeah. Wow. If I'm right, if my interpretation of all this is right, and I just feel very strongly that this is what I need to be saying and how I need to be explaining these cards, the mystery of the lost colony of Roanoke really doesn't have the scary and bloody connotations that people give it. Not necessarily. Because what I got was, right, how they were networking, putting their heads together with the First Nations, learning from them, right? And they took up that opportunity to learn from them. We have a lot of them. Look at that. That is, like, happiness, the, like, dream home life. Now, it may not have been dream life for everybody, but there was also a lot of, like, prosperity and all different creative possibilities. And it was, due to the fact that they felt abandoned when they lived at Roanoke. When they first settled, they felt abandoned because they didn't have as much help from the English government as they would like to have. And then we have partnerships. So I think and on the bottom we have hope. We have temperance, which is like gradual healing, learning how to, what is this? Somewhat give and take. And this is also a card of integration. Look at that. Integrating the water from this cup to this cup. Integrating the cultural, maybe, ways of life and ways of survival between the Europeans and the First Nations. And right underneath of that is the leaving. That was why they left Roanoke, because they felt clueless. And perhaps Roanoke just wasn't a safe, maybe it just wasn't a safe place to be for whatever reason. But we have hope. The ones who stayed behind and did not go back to England right away had hope that this would get better, that they would have the security they needed to have. And yes, I'm pulling from the bottom of the deck again. You guys can't really see that I'm doing that, but that is where I'm pulling these cards from. They wanted that security, prosperity. Now, when White came back, all he saw was this loss. This land is empty now. This town is empty. Where did everyone go? But what happened was they went off on a new, kind of like their own new adventure. They went off to do their own thing. They were given the opportunity for this prosperity. And the ones who took it, were the ones who integrated with the First Nations and learned how to live on that land. But here we have like the confusion. Here's where the confusion comes in, because it's like White and the people who came back to Roanoke found it empty. Were like, okay, what the hell happened? Anytime they try, like not just them, but there were other people over the many years into the 1600s even who tried looking for these colonists. Where did they go? They couldn't find anyone. Well, and part of it is because back in those days, they did not have, you couldn't just call someone up and be like, hey, where are you at? Where'd you go? Oh, we actually just went to the village down the road. Oh, okay, I'll meet you there. They weren't able to do that. They didn't have like a postal system. And maybe the colonists, tried to set something like that up, right? But when White came back, there was no way that he could send out a message to them and be like, where are you? And every time that he tried looking for them, or like they were stopped by, there was storms, or, they'd get stolen from, or people in their crew would be killed. And I can't imagine how actually devastating that must have been, because his baby granddaughter was one of the ones left behind, right? And I'm assuming, I don't know if the Virginia Dare was his like son's child or his daughter's child, but that's like at least two people right there that he loved. He was not able to find them. And a lot of these people who tried to find these colonists spent their time like searching for them and wondering what happened. But what seems to have happened is that these people sort of disbanded and went to various different locations in order to live in a way that worked for them, right? Trying to move to a new land where nobody, you don't know the culture of the people there. Some of those people may not have even realized there were other people who already lived there. And just having to start from scratch and create something that they already had comfortably in England. They could already rely on in England. They had to start that from scratch in North America. And it was what I understand from these cards is that it was way too hard. It was way too hard. And Roanoke may not have been the ideal location at first. And so the colonists moved to various locations. Maybe there were First Nations like families who took certain individuals in who were suffering or struggling and tried to help them, because there are always good people in every culture, in every place, in every time period. There are always good people. And, maybe once the colonists, some of them got on their feet and got used to, this is how we live in this land, this is the way things are done here, they were able to then move on to different places and start settlements by themselves. So that gives me a lot of hope, because it wasn't necessarily, now some of them, yes, unfortunately, some of the colonists in some villages and some wherever they moved to got caught in the middle of tribal battles or fights. And it is really sad, but that is what happened to some of the people. But for the most part, they did not just abandon Roanoke because they were all slaughtered. They left it and they dismantled it because they simply could not survive there. It was way too hard, and they needed to go somewhere where they could learn how to live on the land. So that seems to be what happened with Roanoke. I really hope you enjoyed this historical tarot video, and if you want more historical videos, let me know. Leave a comment. And if you like my channel, hit subscribe, hit the bell if you like getting those notifications every time I post. share the videos, share whatever you want to do. You know, I just really appreciate you all being here. So, yeah, thank you so much.